to the next level.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Kiana and I do a lot of sewing and fashion videos. And today I have a tutorial for another corset. I made my corset top in leather, but of course you can use any fabric that you want. I am going to be showing you guys how to both pattern and sew this top, but if you don't want to pattern it, that's okay because I have my pattern available on Etsy and it is the first link down below. And as always, I will have all the supplies and equipment I used in this video linked down below as well. So if you want to learn how to create this corset top, just keep watching. Like all of my other corset videos, I am draping to create the pattern. To save some time, I'm not going to go into full detail on my draping methods, but I already have multiple videos up where I do that, so I will link a card on the top of the screen and link a video down below. And so I want to focus on the key differences with how I'm draping this corset versus the others. As you can see, I've added a bust bridge with some scrap pieces of muslin so that the corset does not collapse into the chest. I've also lengthened this corset past the natural waistline by a couple inches so that it could look nice tucked in or worn with low-waisted jeans. Now what I've done that is different in this corset is after I draped my pieces, I went back during flat pattern making and flattened out the bust area just slightly. I flattened out the curves at these two seams right here. And because I did that, it's not going to drape nicely on the dress form anymore. But I wanted to do that because if you lace yourself up nice and tight, then it will squeeze the bust area and give you more lift. So here are the front pattern pieces. And like I was saying, in this area right here, this is the bust and I'm trying to flatten it out. The bust curve on this piece is already pretty flat, so I don't need to do anything to it. However, on this piece, you can see where I originally draped and marked that curve, and then where I actually drew the line later on. You can see how I flattened that curve, and I did the same thing over here, and the same thing over here as well. So if you're printing the pattern, make sure you print it out at 100% scale, and then just line up the corresponding letters, tape them together, and then cut them out. You'll have 5 corset pattern pieces and 1 interfacing piece. After I cut out my shell fabric, I'm ready to construct it. So I'm just going to sew up all the vertical seam lines with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then after that, I'm going to do the exact same thing, but with the lining. Now we're going to add some boning, and usually I like to use spiral steel boning, but because I had none of that on hand today, I'm just using regular boning that you can get from like any fabric store. You want to measure your boning to be the length of your vertical seam and then just cut that, and then you want to repeat that process for all of your vertical seams. Now you want to remove the boning from the casing and save that for later because we're just going to be working with the casing for now. Place the casing in the center of the seam allowance on the wrong side of your bodice, and I pinned directly in the center of that seam so I didn't make any permanent holes in my leather. Next, you're going to attach your casing to your bodice by stitching a line on either side of the casing. I switched to a Teflon foot since I'm working with faux leather and it helps glide the fabric through the machine easily. But just take your time on this step. It's a little bit time consuming, but just make sure you're catching the casing on the other side and that your stitches are nice and even. And one tip that you guys have definitely heard from me before already, if I'm top stitching from the bottom to the top on the corset, I'm going to top stitch from the bottom to the top on the corset for every single seam. This consistency just helps ensure that the seams aren't going to pull in any weird ways. Next, we're going to return back to the boning, and I'm going to cut the boning even further to about 1 inch shorter than the actual seam is. When we stitch together the rest of the bodice, we cannot sew through the boning, so that is why we're doing this. After you trim all your boning pieces, just slide them into their respective casings. Now take your interfacing and cut 4 of those, and you're going to line that up on the wrong side of both your lining fabric and your shell fabric. Place the interfacing at the center back seam without going into the seam allowance and iron it on. This will help stabilize your eyelets later on. Now place the lining and shell right sides together and pin along the neckline and center back seams. We're going to be sewing where we just pinned, and we are going to add twill tape to our neckline as we do this. Now this can be optional, but it will keep your neckline from stretching out in the future. Now I want to show you guys exactly how I'm going to add the twill tape while I'm sewing. As I'm sewing with my normal 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'll be feeding the twill tape directly into the center of that stitch line. Because I can't pivot the twill tape at the corners of the neckline, I'll be cutting and starting a new piece of twill tape at both corner points of the neckline. So how I'm placing the twill tape now is exactly how I'm going to be placing it while I'm sewing the seam, and I'll show you that in 1 second. So I'm starting off by sewing the seam at the center back seam line using 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm sewing this normally, I'm not adding any twill tape here. When I get to the corner of this seam, I'm going to put my needle down into the garment, raise my presser foot, and pivot my garment. Now I'm going to be adding my twill tape to the entire neckline. So like I explained before, I'm going to be placing my twill tape directly in the center of where I'm going to be stitching. And when I get to that corner point, I'm going to trim the twill tape and start a new piece. Just take this very slow. This is actually quite easy if you just take your time, and for reference, this clip is sped up to 20 times speed, so I took my time. After that, just prep your neckline to be turned right side out, so I clipped my corners and I clipped my curves. Flip your garment right side out, making sure to poke out your corners and give the neckline and the center back seam a good press. Now we need to add boning to the center back seam, so cut your boning pieces the length of that center back seam. And we don't actually need the casing for this, so just slip the plastic boning out and get rid of the casing. I'm going to stitch my own channel for this boning to be inserted into. So since my boning is a 1/4 inch wide, I'm going to stitch a line from the center back seam that's a little bit more than a 1/4 inch wide so that boning can be easily inserted. After I sew the boning channel, I'm going to pivot my garment and continue top stitching along the neckline. So as you can see here, I'm sewing my boning channel, and then once I get to the corner, I'm going to pivot my garment and then continue top stitching along the rest of the neckline. And then when I get to the other side, I'm going to pivot again and sew down the other boning channel. Now you can just insert your boning and make sure it's short enough that when you sew the hem of this garment that your needle does not hit the boning. Now to hem the corset, I'm going to use pre-made bias tape, but you can also make your own. To attach the bias tape, I'm going to unfold it, leave an inch out at the end, and then I'm going to sew in that first crease line closest to the hem. To finish the bias tape off nicely, I'm going to fold over that inch that we left out earlier and stitch down inside that same line. Then just refold the bias tape to how it was before, so fold it in quarters where it's already creased. And then just stitch through all the layers. Normally I might choose to stitch in the ditch, meaning I would stitch right in that seam line, but because of the fabric that I'm working with and because there's already so much top stitching, I'm choosing to visibly top stitch the binding. Now the last step is to insert your eyelets. After playing around with it, I decided to go with 9 eyelets. So I made 9 marks equidistant from each other at the center back seam. I'm using 1/4 inch eyelets, but you can use whatever size you like. And I'm also using eyelet pliers to insert them. You can insert your eyelets manually. That's what I used to do until I got these eyelet pliers a couple weeks ago, but let me tell you, this is a game changer. After you've inserted all your eyelets, it's time to lace up your corset. Now, because this is more of a fashion piece, you can lace it up however you like, but I'm choosing to use 2 separate strings ending at the waistline so that I can give the corset maximum shaping ability. And after that, you are done and you have yourself a new fashion corset top. Alright, so that is how you create this corset top. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. If you do decide to recreate this look, definitely send me a picture on Instagram. I'd love to see, and I might repost your look. So if you are not already following me on Instagram and TikTok, my handle is Kiana Bonolo. And remember that the Etsy pattern and all of the supplies and equipment I used throughout this video are linked in the description. Make sure if you enjoyed this video to give me a thumbs up because it's the easiest way to support your favorite creators for free, and also subscribe. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!